For my own protection, I am documenting this. I have a customer who is refusing to comply with restaurant policy and is becoming aggressive.
So to be clear, you are refusing to serve me because I will not present an ID that you have not requested from any other customer in this restaurant. Is that correct?
The Gilded Spoon was the kind of place that thrived on the quiet hum of ambient success. Sunlight, thick and golden as honey, poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dance of dust motes over polished oak tables. The air smelled of freshly ground espresso, rosemary focaccia, and the faint, clean scent of lemon wax. It was an oasis of curated calm in the heart of a bustling city, a place where business deals were sealed over artisan salads and quiet confessions were shared over cups of steaming herbal tea. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the lunch rush had ebbed, leaving behind the gentle murmur of a few lingering patrons. An older couple shared a slice of cheesecake by the window, their laughter soft and infrequent. Two men in sharp suits spoke in low, earnest tones, a laptop open between them. The clinking of silverware against ceramic was the loudest sound in the room. Into this carefully constructed serenity walked Dr. Alana Sterling. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer, charcoal trousers, and practical but elegant leather flats. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, low bun, and her only jewelry was a simple watch and a pair of understated pearl earrings. There was an air of focused composure about her, the kind that comes from a life spent navigating complex systems and demanding respect in rooms where it wasn't always freely given. She had just concluded a grueling 3-hour deposition, and her mind was a whirlwind of legal statutes, witness testimonies, and strategic counter-arguments. All she wanted was a quiet corner, a bowl of the bistro's famed butternut squash soup, and 30 minutes of solitude to decompress before heading back to the office. She scanned the room, her eyes briefly meeting those of a young hostess who offered a polite, professional smile. Alana gestured toward a small, empty table in a secluded corner, and the hostess nodded, grabbing a menu. As she was being led to her seat, she noticed the man behind the counter. He was younger than her, perhaps in his early 30s, with a styled haircut that looked expensive, and a slim-fit shirt that strained slightly at the shoulders. He was wiping down the gleaming chrome of the espresso machine with a tense, methodical energy. His jaw was tight, and a small frown was etched between his brows. This was Kevin Thorne, the owner, founder, and self-proclaimed visionary behind the Gilded Spoon. Kevin was having a terrible day. Not that any of his patrons would know it, he prided himself on maintaining the illusion of effortless perfection. But beneath the surface, his world was fraying at the edges. His head chef had called in sick with the flu, forcing him to oversee the kitchen during the busiest part of the day. A critical delivery of organic produce had arrived 2 hours late, throwing his dinner prep schedule into chaos. And just 30 minutes ago, his primary investor had called to express serious concerns about the bistro's quarterly profit margins, using phrases like underperforming assets and reevaluating our partnership. Kevin felt a knot of pressure tightening in his chest. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a business, it was his identity. He had sunk his entire inheritance and a mountain of debt into this place. He had built it from a derelict storefront into a celebrated culinary destination. He saw it as a monument to his taste, his ambition, and his hard work. And now, he felt it slipping through his fingers. He looked up from the espresso machine, his gaze sweeping across the dining room, a general doing a quick survey of his battlefield. He saw the couple, the businessmen, and then he saw Alana Sterling taking her seat. She was a new face. He didn't recognize her from the usual crowd of regulars. She was well-dressed, confident, but something about her presence on this particular day, at this particular moment, struck a dissonant chord in his frayed psyche. He couldn't have articulated why. It wasn't a logical thought, it was a feeling, a vague and unexamined flicker of unease. In his mind, she didn't fit the curated image of his clientele. This feeling, born of stress and a deep-seated, unacknowledged bias, began to curdle into a strange, formless suspicion. He watched as the hostess placed a menu on her table and left. He saw Alana place her briefcase neatly on the floor beside her chair, her movements precise and unhurried. The knot of pressure in his chest tightened into something uglier. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to assert his authority, to impose control over the one small part of his world he felt he still commanded: the front door. He put down his cleaning cloth, straightened his shirt, and began walking toward her table, a disastrous decision already taking root in his mind. He had no idea he was walking toward the complete and utter destruction of everything he had built. Alana had just opened the menu, her eyes scanning the familiar list of sandwiches and soups, a small smile touching her lips as she anticipated the comforting warmth of her favorite dish. She was so engrossed in the simple pleasure of the moment that she didn't notice Kevin Thorne's approach until his shadow fell across her table. She looked up, expecting the standard, "Welcome to the Gilded Spoon. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her smile was ready, a polite and automatic response. But it faltered when she saw the expression on his face. It wasn't welcoming. It was a guarded, unsmiling mask of authority. He stood over her table, his arms crossed, his posture radiating a sense of confrontation. The calm atmosphere of the bistro seemed to hold its breath. The soft jazz music playing from the overhead speakers suddenly felt thin and inadequate, a flimsy veil over the burgeoning tension. Kevin didn't greet her. He didn't introduce himself. He simply looked down at her and said, his voice low but carrying in the quiet room, "I'm going to need to see some form of identification before we can serve you." The words hung in the air, sharp and alien. Alana's mind, still shifting gears from the complex legal arguments of her deposition, took a moment to process the request. An ID? To order soup? She blinked slowly, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice even and calm, certain she must have misheard him. "Your ID," Kevin repeated, his tone hardening slightly, as if she were being deliberately obtuse. "Driver's license, state ID, I need to see it." Alana's eyebrows drew together in a faint, quizzical line. She looked from his stern face to the other occupied tables. The elderly couple by the window were now looking over, their conversation halted. The two businessmen had paused their discussion, their heads tilted in curiosity. No one else was being interrogated. No one else was being asked to prove their identity before ordering a meal. The soup she had been looking forward to was forgotten. The brief respite she had sought was shattered. In its place, a familiar and wearying feeling began to settle in her stomach. It was the cold, heavy weight of being singled out, of being marked as different, as a potential problem. She placed her hands flat on the table, her demeanor shifting from that of a hungry patron to something else. Her internal legal mind, never truly dormant, began to whir. She was no longer just a woman wanting lunch, she was an observer, a participant in an event that was rapidly becoming an incident. The air in the room had changed. The quiet hum had been replaced by a strained, watchful silence. Even the young hostess who had seated her was now hovering near the service station, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and alarm. She knew this wasn't policy. There was no policy. "May I ask why?" Alana's voice was still quiet, but it held a new precision. It was not the question of a confused customer, but the inquiry of someone seeking a specific, factual answer. She was giving him an out, a chance to retreat from this bizarre and unfounded demand. Kevin, however, was too far down his path of stress-fueled self-righteousness to see the lifeline she was offering. He interpreted her calm question not as a reasonable request for clarification, but as a challenge to his authority in his own establishment. The pressure from his investor, the chaos in his kitchen, the feeling of losing control, it all coalesced into a stubborn refusal to back down. "It's our policy," he said, the words coming out clipped and defensive. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, and I need to verify who you are before you can be served." He felt a strange surge of power in saying the words, a fleeting sense of control in a day that had been defined by its absence. He was the owner. These were his rules. He failed to realize he was inventing them on the spot, and that the reason for this invention was rooted in a bias he would never admit, even to himself. The demand had been made. The line had been drawn. The quiet Tuesday lunch had just become a public spectacle, and its star had just delivered a line that would cost him everything. Alana held Kevin's gaze, her expression unreadable. Inside, a cascade of emotions swirled: frustration, disappointment, and a profound sense of exhaustion. She had fought this battle in courtrooms, in boardrooms, and in academic halls. She had not expected to fight it here, over a menu in a sunlit bistro, but her training, her entire professional life, had conditioned her to respond not with anger, but with relentless, methodical logic. Anger was a fire that consumed itself. Logic was a chisel that could break down walls. "A new policy?" she asked, her tone still conversational, yet imbued with an unmistakable sharpness. "I was here for lunch with a colleague about a month ago, and this wasn't a requirement then. Has it been implemented recently?" The question was a precision strike. It established her as a prior customer, not a random stranger, and it framed his demand as an anomaly that required explanation. Kevin was momentarily thrown off balance. He had assumed she was an outsider, someone passing through. The knowledge that she had been there before, that she had a baseline for how his establishment operated, weakened his position. "It's a discretionary policy," he stammered, the words sounding weak even to his own ears. "We apply it when we feel it's necessary for the safety and security of our establishment." Alana's gaze drifted pointedly toward the two businessmen. "Did you feel it was necessary to ask those gentlemen for their identification?" she asked, her voice remaining level. "Or the couple by the window?" The entire room was now an audience. The businessmen were no longer pretending to look at their laptop, they were watching the exchange openly. The elderly woman had put down her fork. The young hostess looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Every eye in the room was on Kevin, and the weight of their collective attention was immense. His face began to flush a deep red. He had been so focused on his interaction with Alana that he hadn't considered the wider implications, the optics of his actions. He had singled out the only black person in the room who was dining alone and subjected them to a demand he had made of no one else. The reality of it was now stark and undeniable, laid bare by her calm, simple questions. "That's not your concern," he snapped, his voice rising in volume. His attempt to project authority was cracking, revealing the defensiveness and panic underneath. "I am the owner of this restaurant, and I am telling you that I require your ID if you wish to order." "I understand you're the owner," Alana replied, her voice a stark contrast to his agitated state. It was a study in control. "But I'm trying to understand the principle behind your policy. What was it about me specifically that made you feel it was necessary to invoke it? I came in, I was seated politely, I looked at the menu. What part of that sequence of events constituted a security concern?" She was dissecting him piece by piece with the detached precision of a surgeon. She wasn't accusing him of racism. She didn't have to. She was simply forcing him to articulate the reasoning behind his actions, knowing full well that he couldn't provide a rationale that wasn't discriminatory. He was trapped. If he said it was her appearance, he would be admitting to prejudice. If he said it was a random check, the evidence of the other unchecked patrons would contradict him. He had no logical ground to stand on. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Kevin's mind raced, searching for an escape route, a plausible justification. He found none. He was cornered by his own foolishness, exposed by the quiet, relentless questioning of the woman he had chosen to target. He had wanted to feel powerful, in control. Instead, he felt foolish and exposed, his authority turning to ash in his mouth. He felt the blush on his cheeks deepen, a hot tide of shame and anger. He had started this. He had to finish it. But instead of de-escalating, of admitting a mistake, he chose to double down, to escalate the situation in a way that would make it irreversible. His hand, shaking almost imperceptibly, reached for the one tool he believed could vindicate him: his smartphone. Just when the tension seemed it could get no thicker, Kevin made his next fateful move. "I'm not going to be interrogated in my own restaurant," he declared, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and self-pity. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few angry taps, he opened the camera app and aimed it at Alana. The small red dot indicating that he was recording blinked to life, a malevolent eye in the quiet room. "For my own protection," he announced loudly, not just to Alana but to the entire room, "I am documenting this interaction. I have a customer who is refusing to comply with restaurant policy and is becoming aggressive." The accusation was so patently false, so disconnected from the reality of the situation, that a collective gasp seemed to ripple through the room. Alana hadn't moved from her chair. Her hands were still resting calmly on the table. Her voice had not risen above a conversational tone. She was the very picture of composure. Kevin, on the other hand, was the one who was visibly agitated, his voice raised, his hand shaking as he held the phone. He was not documenting reality, he was attempting to manufacture it. Alana looked from Kevin's face down to the phone lens pointing at her, and then she looked directly into it. A flicker of something, not sadness, perhaps resolve, passed through her eyes. She understood immediately what was happening. He was trying to create a narrative where she was the aggressor, the difficult customer, a tired and toxic stereotype she knew all too well. He was using his device as both a weapon and a shield, but he had made a critical miscalculation. He had forgotten that he was not the only person in the room with a phone. As if on cue, one of the businessmen at the nearby table quietly picked up his own device. He didn't make a show of it. He simply propped it against the sugar dispenser on his table and angled it to capture the entire scene. Kevin standing, phone held high, and Alana seated looking up at him. The man's colleague saw what he was doing and subtly shifted in his seat to give the camera a clearer view. Then, a second phone came out. A young woman who had been sitting at the bar, nursing a coffee and working on a laptop, had been watching the entire exchange with growing horror. She lifted her phone, her hands trembling slightly, and began recording from a different angle. She captured the wider context, the other patrons, the nervous hostess, the sheer absurdity of a man filming a seated woman who had done nothing but ask for clarification. Kevin was so focused on his own recording, so trapped in his personal drama, that he was completely oblivious to the other cameras that were now silently documenting his downfall. He thought he was creating evidence that would support him. In reality, he was becoming the villain in a multi-angle production he didn't even know was being filmed. Alana saw the other phones. She saw the quiet solidarity from the strangers around her. She didn't smile, but her posture seemed to straighten, if that were even possible. She was no longer alone in this. The truth of the moment was being preserved from multiple perspectives, ensuring that his distorted narrative could not stand unchallenged. "So, to be clear," Alana said, speaking directly to Kevin's phone, her voice as crisp and clear as a court stenographer's record. "You are refusing to serve me because I will not present you with an identification that you have not requested from any other customer in this restaurant. Is that correct?" She was creating a verbal record, a clear and unambiguous summary of events for his camera and for all the others. She was using his own weapon against him. Kevin, realizing his attempt to frame her was backfiring, could only sputter. "I'm asking you to comply with our policy or leave." "There is no policy," Alana stated, not as a question but as a fact. "There is only a demand you have made exclusively to me." She paused, letting the weight of the statement settle in the silent room. The small red light on his phone blinked on, capturing it all. With the truth of the situation now hanging in the air, documented by multiple silent witnesses, Alana knew there was nothing more to be said. To stay would be to legitimize his delusion, to engage in an argument that had no rational basis. Her point had been made not through shouting, but through quiet, incisive questioning. The battle was already over. All that remained was the fallout. She looked directly at Kevin, bypassing the phone he was still holding like a talisman. "Thank you for clarifying your position," she said, the formal words carrying a chill that was more cutting than any insult. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, she began to gather her things. She slid her phone into her blazer pocket. She picked up her briefcase. She pushed her chair back gently, the legs making no sound on the polished floor. Every movement was calm and measured, a stark contrast to Kevin's flustered, aggressive stance. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the businessman who was still recording, a silent acknowledgement of his support. Then, without another glance at Kevin, she turned and walked toward the exit. The chime of the bell on the door as she left sounded like a final judgment in the silent room. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. Kevin stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, his phone still in his hand, pointed at the empty chair. The other patrons stared at him, their expressions a mixture of disgust and disbelief. The spell of the Gilded Spoon's curated tranquility was irrevocably broken. The businessmen quietly asked for their check. The couple by the window had lost their appetite for dessert. Kevin finally lowered his phone, his hand trembling with adrenaline and a simmering rage. He wasn't filled with regret. He was filled with a sense of indignant justification. In his mind, he hadn't been a bully. He had been a vigilant business owner defending his territory. He had faced a challenge to his authority, and in his view, he had won. He had forced her to leave. He conveniently ignored the collateral damage, the alienated customers, the horrified staff, the poisoned atmosphere of his own restaurant. He retreated to the small, cluttered office behind the kitchen, his heart pounding. The stress of the day, now compounded by the confrontation, made his thoughts race. He rewatched the video on his phone. He didn't see his own aggression or the woman's remarkable calm. He saw what he wanted to see, his own voice, firm and commanding, a customer refusing a reasonable request, his final ultimatum that resulted in her departure. He convinced himself that the video was his vindication. It was his proof that he had been in the right. This conviction, born of ego and a profound lack of self-awareness, led him to his final, catastrophic error. He decided he needed to control the narrative. He couldn't risk her or one of the other patrons posting their version of events first. He had to get his side of the story out there. That evening, long after the last of the uncomfortable patrons had left and his staff had departed with averted eyes, Kevin sat alone in his dark restaurant. He logged into the Gilded Spoon's official Facebook page, a platform usually reserved for artful photos of latte foam and announcements about seasonal menu changes. He uploaded his video, and then he wrote the caption. He poured all of his self-perceived victimhood into the text. "A difficult situation at the bistro today," he began. "As a business owner, the safety of my patrons and staff is my highest priority. Today, I was forced to refuse service to an individual who would not comply with our standard security protocols and became confrontational. We will always stand firm to ensure the Gilded Spoon remains a safe and welcoming environment for everyone." He read the words over and over, nodding to himself in the dim light of the monitor. Safe and welcoming, standard protocols, forced to refuse service. It sounded so professional, so justified. He truly believed his followers, the loyal customers who loved his food and the ambiance he had created, would see the video and rally to his defense. They would applaud his strength. They would understand. He clicked the post button. The video went live, and Kevin Thorne went home, utterly convinced he had done something brave. He had no concept of the digital firestorm he had just unleashed upon himself. Kevin slept poorly, his mind still buzzing from the day's confrontation, but he awoke with a sense of grim satisfaction. He imagined logging on to find messages of support, affirmations from his community. He made a cup of coffee, sat down at his kitchen table, and opened his laptop to check the Gilded Spoon's Facebook page. His world fell apart in the space of a single screen refresh. The post had exploded, but not in the way he had envisioned. The view count was staggering, already in the tens of thousands and climbing rapidly. It had been shared hundreds, then thousands of times. But the comments section was a digital inferno. There was no support. There was no applause. There was only a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated fury. Standard security protocols? You mean serving while black protocols? The top comment read with over 1,000 likes. This is one of the most disgusting displays of racial profiling I have ever seen. The woman was the definition of calm, while you, the owner, were aggressive, unprofessional, and, frankly, unhinged, said another. Someone had taken the time to transcribe Alana's questions. Did you ask those gentlemen for their identification? The silence after she asked that was deafening. You had no answer because your policy is racism, plain and simple. The video he had posted to vindicate himself was being used as the primary evidence against him. People were dissecting his every word, his body language, his shaky hands. They contrasted it with Alana's unwavering poise. She wasn't an individual who became confrontational. She was a paragon of grace under pressure. He wasn't a vigilant business owner. He was a petty tyrant on a power trip. But it got worse. The businessman who had recorded the second video had posted his own footage in the comments. His version was longer and had a wider angle. It clearly showed the other patrons watching in horror. It captured Alana's dignified exit and Kevin standing alone, looking lost and foolish. The businessman had added his own caption. I was at the Gilded Spoon today and witnessed this. The owner's description of events is a complete fabrication. He singled out this woman for no reason and harassed her. This was not about security, it was about prejudice. I will not be returning. This second video added damning context and corroboration. It eviscerated Kevin's narrative. Now there were two pieces of evidence, and both told the same story, a story in which he was the unambiguous villain. The internet, acting as a swift and brutal jury, had reached its verdict. Kevin Thorne was guilty. The outrage spread from Facebook to other platforms. The videos were ripped and re-uploaded to Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit. On each platform, the story took on a life of its own, amplified by hashtags. Hashtag Gilded Spoon Racism. Hashtag Dining While Black. Hashtag Kevin Thorne. People with large followings, activists, journalists, even celebrities, began to share it. The story was no longer a local dispute. It was becoming a national headline, a textbook example of modern, casual racism captured on camera. Kevin sat frozen in his chair, the coffee in his mug growing cold. He scrolled and scrolled, each comment a fresh blow to his ego. He saw his life's work being torn apart in real time. He felt a rising tide of panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were twisting it, misinterpreting his intentions. He wasn't a racist. He was just stressed. He was just trying to protect his business. But his intentions didn't matter. All that mattered was the video. The cold, objective lens of the camera had captured a truth that his own self-perception could not, and the world was now showing it back to him, magnified 1,000,000 times over. The digital storm had arrived, and it was far more powerful and destructive than he could ever have imagined. The onslaught was relentless. By 9 a.m., what had started as a social media backlash had evolved into a full-scale digital siege. Every online portal associated with the Gilded Spoon became a target. Its Yelp page, which had proudly boasted a 4.5-star rating, was now a wasteland of 1-star reviews. People who had never set foot in the restaurant left scathing critiques, not of the food, but of the owner's character. The racism comes with a side of arugula, one review began. The owner, Kevin Thorne, provides a uniquely humiliating dining experience. He might demand your papers before you can order a latte. 1 out of 5 stars. Avoid at all costs. Another wrote, came here for brunch, got a free lesson in systemic bias instead. The food is irrelevant when the establishment is morally bankrupt. The bistro's Google business profile suffered the same fate. Its rating plummeted from a stellar 4.7 to a dismal 1.2 in a matter of hours. The review section became a public forum for people to express their disgust. The comments on the original Facebook video had now swelled into the thousands, a roaring chorus of condemnation. Kevin, in a fit of panic, deleted the post. It was a futile gesture. Dozens of copies of both videos were already circulating, and his deletion was immediately seen as an admission of guilt. "He's trying to hide the evidence," a user on Twitter posted, alongside a fresh upload of the video. The attempt at damage control only made things worse. His phone began to ring incessantly. The first call was from a local news blogger. The second was from a reporter at a major city newspaper. The third was a producer for a morning news television show. They all wanted the same thing: a comment, a statement, his side of the story. Kevin, overwhelmed and utterly unprepared for this level of scrutiny, let every call go to voicemail. He felt like a cornered animal. Every digital window he looked through showed him a reflection of his own failure. The restaurant's email inbox was overflowing. Messages from former loyal customers expressed their profound disappointment. "My family and I have been coming to the Gilded Spoon for years," one email read. "We celebrated birthdays and anniversaries at your tables. To see you treat someone with such contempt is heartbreaking. We will not be back." Corporate lunch accounts, a significant source of the bistro's weekday revenue, began sending terse notifications of cancellation. Then came the reservation system. People were booking tables for large parties under names like MLK Jr., Rosa Parks, and BLM Protest, only to have no one show up, leaving the restaurant with empty tables it had held during peak hours. It was a form of digital protest, creative and cripplingly effective. Kevin stumbled through his apartment in a daze. The sun was streaming through his windows, mocking him with the cheerfulness of a normal day. But nothing was normal. In less than 24 hours, the reputation he had spent years meticulously building had been systematically and publicly dismantled. He had been so proud of his online presence, his glowing reviews, his curated Instagram feed. He had used these tools to build his brand, to project an image of sophisticated success. Now, those same tools were being used to orchestrate his destruction. He felt a surge of defiant anger. They didn't know him. They didn't understand the pressure he was under. They were a faceless mob, jumping on a bandwagon without knowing the full context. But what context was he missing? He kept coming back to the video, the woman's calm, steady voice, his own defensive, cracking tone. He had handed them the weapon, fully loaded. The siege wasn't just happening to his business, it was happening inside his own head. The digital voices were becoming a deafening roar, and for the first time, a sliver of doubt, a terrifying thought that maybe, just maybe they were right, began to pierce through his armor of self-justification. By midday, the digital inferno began to manifest in the physical world. A small group of people, maybe a dozen at first, gathered on the public sidewalk in front of the Gilded Spoon. They weren't loud or aggressive. They stood quietly, holding signs made of cardboard and markers. The messages were simple and direct. Racism is not on the menu. Dignity is not discretionary. We stand with the woman in the video. Kevin watched them from behind the locked glass doors of his restaurant. He had come in early, driven by some desperate, half-formed idea of opening for business as usual, of pretending everything was fine. But the sight of the protesters, their quiet judgment more piercing than any shout, paralyzed him. A few passers-by stopped, read the signs, and nodded in solidarity. A car driving past honked its horn in support. The small protest was a visible, tangible symbol that the problem was no longer confined to screens and comment sections. It was on his doorstep. His phone buzzed. It wasn't a reporter this time. The caller ID displayed the name Arthur Vance. A cold dread washed over Kevin. Arthur was his primary investor, the man whose concerned phone call had been the catalyst for his terrible day yesterday. He had put up 60% of the capital to launch the Gilded Spoon. He was not a man to be trifled with. Kevin's hand shook as he answered. "Kevin," Arthur's voice was clipped, devoid of any warmth. "I have a Google alert set for the Gilded Spoon. My phone has been vibrating off my desk for the last 4 hours. Explain." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Kevin, his voice hoarse, tried to spin the story, falling back on the same weak justifications he had used in his deleted Facebook post. Arthur, it's been blown completely out of proportion. There was a customer, a security issue. I had to ask her to leave. I saw the video, Kevin. Arthur cut him off. I saw two of them, in fact. What I saw was not a security issue. What I saw was you, the owner of a business I have a significant financial stake in, harassing a customer and creating a public relations nightmare that is now the #1 trending topic in this city. I've had calls from 2 other investors in my portfolio asking if this is how my businesses are run. Kevin felt the floor drop out from under him. Arthur, I can fix this. I'll issue a statement, an apology. You'll do nothing until you meet with me and my lawyer. My office. 1 hour, Arthur said. And Kevin, he added, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, you had better have a damn good explanation for why I shouldn't invoke the character and reputation clause in our contract and pull every last cent of my funding. The line went dead. Character and reputation clause. Kevin had barely glanced at that part of the contract, dismissing it as standard boilerplate. Now, the words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. This was no longer just about angry Yelp reviews or a few protesters. This was about the very financial foundation of his business. The first major crack had appeared, and he could feel the entire structure beginning to groan under the strain. He looked back out the window. The group of protesters had grown slightly. A local news van had just pulled up to the curb, a cameraman already setting up his equipment. The quiet, curated world of the Gilded Spoon was gone. It had been replaced by a spectacle, a media circus, a public trial, and he was the one at the center of it all, a man watching his empire crumble because of a single, inexplicable moment of prejudice and pride. The cracks were spreading, and he had no idea how to stop them. While Kevin was in a state of freefall, the other side of the story was taking a dramatic and unexpected turn. Across the city, in a quiet law office, a paralegal named Sarah was scrolling through her Twitter feed during her lunch break. She stopped abruptly when a video, shared by a local activist, appeared on her screen. She watched it, her brow furrowed with the same disgust as thousands of others. She saw the arrogant restaurant owner, the calm and dignified woman, the tense exchange. But as she watched, a jolt of recognition shot through her. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes wide. She knew that woman. She had worked with her for 3 years at a nonprofit legal aid clinic before going to law school. She recognized the poise, the controlled cadence of her speech, the methodical way she dismantled the owner's argument without ever raising her voice. It was unmistakable. The woman in the video, the anonymous victim of a viral incident of racial profiling, was Dr. Alana Sterling. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. She pulled up the website for one of the city's most prestigious civil rights law firms. And there she was, on the Our Team page. A professional headshot of Alana looked out from the screen, next to a formidable biography. Graduate of Harvard Law. Former prosecutor for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, lead counsel on several landmark discrimination cases, an expert in constitutional law and public accommodation statutes. Dr. Alana Sterling wasn't just any customer. She was, quite literally, one of the nation's foremost legal experts on the very type of injustice she had just experienced. The irony was staggering, almost poetic. Kevin Thorne, in his random, bias-fueled decision, had managed to pick a fight with the one person who was uniquely and professionally equipped to hold him accountable on a level he could not possibly comprehend. Sarah took a screenshot of the law firm's webpage and posted it as a reply to the original viral tweet. The woman in this video is Dr. Alana Sterling, she wrote. She is a civil rights attorney. He had no idea who he was messing with. The reply acted like a lit match dropped on a trail of gasoline. The new information spread with breathtaking speed. Within an hour, it was the top story. The narrative was instantly supercharged. This wasn't just a story about a racist restaurant owner and a poised customer anymore. It was now a story about a man who, in a moment of profound ignorance, had tried to humiliate a lioness of the legal world. The public's admiration for Alana, already high due to her composure, skyrocketed. She became a symbol, a folk hero. He brought a knife to a Supreme Court gunfight, one viral tweet quipped. News outlets, which had been treating it as a human interest story about social media justice, now reclassified it as a major legal and political event. Reporters began calling Alana's law firm, which issued a brief, formal statement. Dr. Sterling is aware of the incident and the video circulating online. She is deeply appreciative of the public's support. At this time, she is considering all of her legal options. That last sentence, considering all of her legal options, was a thunderclap. It transformed the situation from a public shaming into the prelude to a legal war. For Kevin Thorne, who had just left Arthur Vance's office feeling beaten and terrified, the news of Alana's identity was the final, devastating blow. He saw her professional headshot on a news website on his phone and felt a wave of nausea. He had assumed she was just someone, a random person. He had treated her as insignificant. He now understood with horrifying clarity that he had not just made a mistake in customer service. He had committed an act of discrimination against a woman who had dedicated her entire life to fighting and dismantling the very prejudice he had so casually displayed. He had not just ensured his restaurant would fail, he had likely ensured his own personal and financial ruin. The revelation of Dr. Alana Sterling's identity was the tipping point. For the business partners and corporate sponsors associated with the Gilded Spoon, the situation had morphed from a manageable PR crisis into an existential threat. Being linked to a viral racist incident was bad. Being linked to a viral racist incident involving a renowned civil rights attorney was catastrophic. The exodus began almost immediately. The first to go was Artisan Breads Collective, the local bakery that supplied all of the Gilded Spoon's bread and pastries. They had been a proud partner, their logo featured on Kevin's menu. At 2 p.m., they posted a statement on their Instagram page. "We are appalled by the behavior of the owner of the Gilded Spoon. This does not reflect our values of inclusivity and respect. Effective immediately, we have terminated our supply contract." It was a swift, public disavowal. Next came the city's premier gourmet food distributor, a major corporation that supplied Kevin with his high-end meats, cheeses, and imported olive oils. They didn't bother with social media. Their legal department sent Kevin a one-sentence email formally announcing the termination of their account, citing a breach of their partnership's ethical conduct clause. This meant Kevin had lost his primary source for the very ingredients that defined his menu. Even if he survived the PR storm, his restaurant could no longer function. The local lifestyle magazine that had featured the Gilded Spoon in a glowing cover story just 6 months prior acted next. They pulled the digital version of the article from their website. The editor-in-chief released a statement saying they were re-evaluating their past coverage and were committed to promoting businesses that foster a truly welcoming environment for all members of our community. The award plaque they had given Kevin, which he had displayed proudly by the entrance, was now a monument to a reputation that no longer existed. The most painful blow, however, came from the Downtown Business Alliance, a consortium of local business owners of which Kevin had been a vocal and proud member. They had worked together on neighborhood improvement projects and holiday marketing campaigns. He considered these people his peers, his allies. The alliance convened an emergency board meeting. By 4 p.m., they had voted unanimously to revoke his membership. The press release was brutal. "The actions of Mr. Thorne are in direct opposition to the values of our community. We cannot and will not tolerate discrimination in any form. The Gilded Spoon is no longer a member of this alliance." Kevin was now an island. In the span of a few hours, the entire professional ecosystem he had built around his restaurant had collapsed. His suppliers, his media champions, his fellow business owners. They had all severed ties, rushing to distance themselves from his toxicity. Each public statement, each severed contract, was another nail in his business's coffin. He sat in his empty restaurant, the silence broken only by the incessant buzzing of his phone. The protesters had gone home for the day, but their signs lay discarded on the sidewalk, a grim reminder of his new reality. He felt a profound sense of abandonment. He had thought of himself as a pillar of the local business community, a success story. He now saw that his position had always been conditional. His allies were not his friends. They were partners in a mutually beneficial enterprise. The moment he became a liability, the moment his brand became toxic, they had cut him loose without a second thought. It was a cold, hard lesson in business and in life. The Gilded Spoon was no longer a gilded brand. It was a contaminated one, and no one wanted to be touched by it. After the disastrous meeting with his investor and the subsequent exodus of his partners, Kevin Thorne finally understood that silence was no longer an option. He was drowning, and he needed a lifeline. Against Arthur Vance's explicit advice to say nothing until the lawyers figure out a strategy, Kevin felt a desperate need to do something, to reclaim control. He decided he would issue a public apology. He would show everyone he was sorry, that he understood his mistake, that he was not the monster they were making him out to be. He spent 2 hours laboring over the statement, sitting in his dark, empty office. He typed and deleted, rephrased and rewrote. The final product was a masterclass in how not to apologize. It was a self-serving, defensive, and tone-deaf mess that only revealed his complete failure to grasp the gravity of his actions. He posted it on the restaurant's Instagram and Facebook pages, the first new content since he had deleted the fateful video. "To our community," it began, "I am writing to address the events of this past Tuesday. A video from my restaurant has been circulated and has caused a great deal of pain, and for that, I am truly sorry. It was never my intention to make anyone feel unwelcome at the Gilded Spoon. The situation that occurred was the result of a misunderstanding and a stressful day, and it was handled poorly by me. I can see now how my actions could be misinterpreted as being racially motivated." The internet's response was instantaneous and merciless. The apology was not seen as a gesture of contrition, but as a calculated attempt to minimize his culpability. Amateur and professional critics alike immediately began to dissect it, line by line. "A video has been circulated," one commentator on Twitter wrote. "Not the video I filmed and posted to frame a black woman. He talks about it like it's a natural disaster that just happened to him. Caused a great deal of pain," another mocked. Passive voice. He's not saying I caused pain. He's saying pain spontaneously generated in his general vicinity. The phrase, "it was never my intention," drew particular scorn. People pointed out that intent was irrelevant. The impact of his actions was what mattered. But the line that truly ignited the fresh wave of fury was, "how my actions could be misinterpreted." "Misinterpreted?" a popular blogger wrote in a scathing post. "There is no misinterpretation. You demanded ID from a black woman for no reason. You filmed her. You posted it with a fabricated story. This isn't a Rorschach test. It's a crystal clear act of racism. To suggest we are all misinterpreting it is profoundly insulting to our intelligence and to Dr. Sterling." His attempt to blame his behavior on a stressful day was also ridiculed as a pathetic and irrelevant excuse. "Oh, you had a stressful day," a top comment read. "Join the club." Most of us manage to get through a stressful day without racially profiling our customers. The apology, which he had hoped would quench the flames, acted like a tanker truck full of gasoline. It showed that he still didn't get it. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry for the consequences he was facing. His focus was on his own feelings, his own intentions, his own stressful day. The apology centered himself as the victim of a misunderstanding. Within an hour, the #sign not an apology was trending. Dr. Alana Sterling's law firm, which had remained silent until then, released a second, colder statement. "We have seen Mr. Thorne's statement. It is inadequate and fails to take any meaningful responsibility for his discriminatory actions. Our position remains unchanged." Kevin sat watching the fresh wave of digital hatred wash over him. He truly could not understand. He had said he was sorry. What more did they want from him? His inability to see past his own ego, to feel genuine empathy for the woman he had humiliated, was his ultimate undoing. The failed apology was proof that he was incapable of learning, of changing, and it solidified the public resolve that the gilded spoon did not deserve a second chance. It deserved to close. The hollow, self-serving apology was the final catalyst. For Dr. Alana Sterling and her legal team, it was the definitive proof that Kevin Thorne was not interested in genuine remorse or reconciliation, but only in damage control. Any lingering thoughts of seeking a private settlement or a mediated resolution evaporated. The incident had become a public matter, and it now demanded a public and legal reckoning. 1 week to the day after Alana had walked into the Gilded Spoon for a quiet lunch, a courier arrived at the restaurant's locked front door. Kevin, who had been inside sorting through piles of unpaid invoices, watched the man approach with a sense of grim finality. The courier taped a thick manila envelope to the glass. Kevin waited until the man was gone before he stepped outside into the pale afternoon light and peeled it off the door. His hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a professionally bound document, its cover page bearing the crest of the state's Superior Court. The words leaped out at him, cold and formal and devastating. Alana Sterling v. The Gilded Spoon, LLC, and Kevin Thorne individually. He had been officially served. He stumbled back inside and collapsed into a chair at one of the empty tables, the legal document spread out before him. It was dozens of pages long, filled with dense legal language, but the core of it was brutally clear. The lawsuit alleged multiple violations of both state and federal law, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin in places of public accommodation. The suit methodically laid out the facts of the case, presenting the narrative with a lawyer's dispassionate precision. It detailed his demand for identification, his failure to apply this policy to white patrons, his aggressive posture, and his filming of Dr. Sterling. It included a reference to his defamatory social media post, accusing him of knowingly publishing a false narrative to damage Dr. Sterling's reputation. The lawsuit was not just against the business, it was against him personally. Alana's lawyers were seeking to pierce the corporate veil, arguing that since Kevin was the sole owner and his actions were so egregious and personal, he should be held individually liable for the damages. This meant his personal assets, his savings, his car, his apartment, were now at risk. The list of demands was staggering. The suit sought compensatory damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. It sought punitive damages, designed to punish him for his reckless and malicious conduct and to deter others from similar behavior. It demanded a public, court-ordered injunction forcing him to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all future staff. A moot point, as he had no staff left. And it demanded that he pay all of Dr. Sterling's substantial legal fees. The document also contained a chilling attachment, a formal notice of preservation of evidence, demanding he not delete or alter any digital evidence, including the original video files, social media data, and all internal and external communications related to the incident. Kevin read it all in a fog of disbelief. This was real. This was not a storm of angry tweets or bad reviews that might eventually blow over. This was the full, crushing weight of the United States legal system descending upon him. The document in his hands was a blueprint for his complete financial and professional ruin. Dr. Alana Sterling was not just seeking an apology or a settlement. She was seeking justice, and she was using the powerful tools of her own profession to get it. The video had made the court of public opinion rule against him. The lawsuit was ensuring the actual court of law would have its chance to do the same. There was no escape now. The fight had moved to her home turf, and he was hopelessly outmatched. The news of the lawsuit was the final, fatal blow to the Gilded Spoon's already moribund existence. The story was picked up by national news outlets, transforming Kevin from a local villain into a national symbol of casual bigotry. Any faint hope he had of weathering the storm and reopening was extinguished. The restaurant, once his pride and joy, became his prison. The few remaining staff members who had held on out of a misplaced sense of loyalty or a simple need for a paycheck tendered their resignations. No one wanted to be associated with a business facing a high-profile federal discrimination lawsuit. His young hostess, the one who had watched the initial incident with wide-eyed horror, left a note on the counter. "I'm sorry, Kevin," it read. "I can't work here anymore. What happened was wrong, and I can't pretend it wasn't." His suppliers, who had previously operated on credit, now demanded cash on delivery for any orders. But there was nothing to order. There were no customers to cook for. The phones were silent, except for the occasional call from a journalist or a curious local wanting to know if the racist restaurant was still open. Days turned into a week, then 2. Kevin would show up every morning out of a grim, stubborn habit. He would walk through the dark dining room, the chairs still stacked on the tables. Dust began to gather on the polished oak surfaces. The air, once filled with the aroma of coffee and fresh bread, grew stale and stagnant. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket smothering the memory of what the place used to be. The sun would stream through the large windows, illuminating an empty, lifeless space. It felt like a tomb. His financial situation grew more desperate by the day. Revenue had dropped to 0, but the bills kept coming. Rent, utilities, insurance, loan payments. He drained his business savings account to cover the first month. He then began to burn through his personal savings, the money he had set aside for a down payment on a house. The lawsuit meant he had to hire a lawyer, and the retainer fee alone was a staggering sum that wiped out a significant portion of his remaining funds. His lawyer was blunt, telling him that his case was extraordinarily weak and that his best bet was to seek a settlement. But Alana Sterling's team was not interested in settling quickly or cheaply. He began selling off assets. The gleaming espresso machine, which he had polished with such pride, was sold for half its value to a cafe owner from another town. He sold the wine inventory, the high-end kitchen equipment, the custom-made tables and chairs. Each sale felt like a dismemberment, a piece of his dream being carted away by strangers. The emptiness of the restaurant was a powerful physical manifestation of his actions. The empty tables were a constant, silent rebuke. Each vacant chair represented a customer he had alienated, a relationship he had destroyed. He had stood in the middle of this room, so full of arrogance and misplaced authority, and driven away one person. But in doing so, he had driven them all away. The community that had once sustained his business had collectively turned its back on him. He often found himself staring at the exact spot where Alana Sterling had been sitting. He would replay the interaction in his mind over and over, that single 60-second exchange. His demand, her calm questions, his disastrous decision to pull out his phone. It was a ghost that haunted the room, a memory that was now more real than the physical restaurant itself. The consequences were no longer abstract digital comments or legal threats in an envelope. They were here, in the cold, silent, and empty room that had once been the center of his world. Months after the lawsuit was filed, the day arrived that Kevin had been dreading most, his deposition. He sat at a long, polished table in a sterile conference room at Alana Sterling's law firm. Across from him sat Alana herself, flanked by 2 other lawyers from her firm. Alana was not there to ask questions. Her presence alone was a powerful statement. She watched him, her expression neutral, as her colleague, a sharp older attorney named Marcus Thorne, no relation, began the questioning. A court reporter sat at the end of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, ready to record every word under oath. Kevin's lawyer had prepped him for hours, advising him to keep his answers short, to not volunteer information, to stay calm. But under the relentless, surgical questioning of Marcus, Kevin's composure quickly crumbled. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, his voice calm and even, "could you please describe for me the official written policy at the Gilded Spoon that requires patrons to show identification before being served a meal?" It wasn't a written policy, Kevin admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It was discretionary. Discretionary, Marcus repeated, letting the word hang in the air.
And who exercised this discretion?
I did, as the owner. I see. In the 12 months prior to the incident with my client, Dr. Sterling, can you recall a single instance where you exercised this discretion and demanded identification from a white patron? Kevin's mind went blank. He tried to think of an example, any example, but there were none. I can't recall a specific instance. You can't recall one? Marcus pressed. Let me help you. We subpoenaed your employee records and have already taken the deposition of your former hostess. She testified under oath that in the 2 years she worked for you, she never saw you ask a single white customer for ID. Is her testimony inaccurate? Kevin's lawyer placed a hand on his arm. Just answer the question, Kevin. No, Kevin mumbled. Her testimony is accurate. The admission was a critical blow. Marcus moved on, his questions like a series of precise, painful jabs. He brought up the restaurant's finances, showing that Kevin was under extreme financial pressure on the day of the incident. So you were stressed, Mr. Thorne. Your investor was threatening to pull funding. Your chef was sick. You were losing money. Would it be fair to say you were not in a calm state of mind? I was under pressure, yes, Kevin said, seeing a potential excuse. And is it your testimony that when you are under pressure, you respond by enforcing non-existent policies against African-American customers? Objection, Kevin's lawyer said weakly. Argumentative. I'll rephrase, Marcus said smoothly, not missing a beat. What was it specifically about Dr. Sterling that caused you to feel this discretionary policy was necessary? Her clothing was professional. Her demeanor, as seen in the video, was calm. What was the security threat she posed? Kevin was trapped in the same corner Alana had backed him into in the restaurant, only this time his answers were being recorded for trial. He had no good answer. He fell back on the flimsiest of justifications. I don't know. It was a feeling I had. She just seemed out of place. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Out of place? He asked, his voice soft but deadly. Mr. Thorne, the Gilded Spoon is located in a diverse metropolitan city. Your clientele, according to your own marketing materials, is cosmopolitan. What exactly does a person who is out of place in such an environment look like? The implication was clear and devastating. Kevin stared at the table, the polished wood reflecting his own pale, defeated face. He had no answer. His entire defense, built on a foundation of vague feelings and invented policies, was being systematically dismantled. Every word he spoke only dug his hole deeper, revealing the prejudiced core of his actions. Finally, Marcus had the video queued up on a large monitor. I want to talk about your decision to record my client. He played the clip of Kevin announcing he was filming for his protection. Mr. Thorne, what did you need protection from? Kevin watched himself on the screen, his face twisted in an ugly sneer, his voice high and defensive. He saw Alana, seated and calm. The visual contrast was damning. She was being confrontational, he lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Marcus paused the video. Mr. Thorne, you are under oath. Do you wish to reconsider that statement? Kevin looked from the screen to Alana, who was watching him with a profound, unwavering stillness. The lie died on his lips. He slumped in his chair, a broken man. No, he whispered. She wasn't. The unraveling was complete. His justifications were exposed as hollow, his narrative as a fabrication. It was all there, on the record, a testament to a prejudice he couldn't even convincingly defend under scrutiny. The deposition was the end of the line. Kevin's testimony was so damaging, his lack of a credible defense so absolute, that his own lawyer advised him that going to trial would be an act of financial suicide. A jury would likely award Alana Sterling a sum far greater than any potential settlement, especially after seeing him testify in person. The risk of being hit with massive punitive damages was too high. There was no path forward. There was only surrender. Negotiations between the lawyers began in earnest. Alana's team held all the cards, and they were unyielding. They were not interested in a simple monetary settlement that would allow Kevin to quietly move on. They wanted to ensure that a clear and public message was sent. The final settlement agreement was brutal and comprehensive. Kevin was required to liquidate every remaining asset of the Gilded Spoon, LLC. The proceeds would go into a settlement fund. He was also required to contribute a significant amount from his personal funds, forcing him to empty his savings and sell his car. The total sum was enormous, enough to cover Alana's legal fees and to make a substantial donation in her name to a non-profit organization that provided legal aid to victims of discrimination. Alana herself took no personal payment. Her victory was not about money, it was about principle. But the most significant condition of the settlement was the one that sealed his fate as a restaurateur. Kevin Thorne was required to sign a legally binding agreement that included the permanent dissolution of his company, the Gilded Spoon, LLC. He was not just closing the restaurant, he was legally required to terminate its existence. Furthermore, the agreement included a non-disparagement clause that was heavily weighted against him. He could never publicly speak about the case or Dr. Sterling in a negative light, while she retained the right to tell her story. The day he signed the documents was gray and overcast, the weather a perfect match for his mood. He met his lawyer in a small, impersonal office. The settlement papers were spread across the table, a thick stack that represented the complete dismantling of his life's ambition. He picked up the pen, its weight feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. He signed his name over and over, each signature relinquishing another piece of his dream. He signed the asset transfer forms. He signed the corporate dissolution charter. He signed the public apology that Alana's lawyers had drafted, a real apology this time, one that took full and unambiguous responsibility for his discriminatory and harmful actions. When it was over, his lawyer handed him a final set of keys, not to the restaurant, but to the storage unit where the last of the bistro's unsold equipment was being held. The landlord had already changed the locks on the building. "It's done, Kevin," his lawyer said, his voice holding no triumph, only weary finality. Kevin walked out of the office into the drizzling rain. He felt strangely light, hollowed out. The weight of the business, the stress, the lawsuit, it was all gone. But so was everything else. His savings were gone. His reputation was gone. His dream was gone. He walked down the street and passed the now vacant storefront that had once been the Gilded Spoon. A "For Lease" sign was plastered in the window, the bold red letters an epitaph for his failure. He had built it, and with one senseless, prejudiced act, he had destroyed it. The doors were closed for good, not because of bad food or a poor economy, but because of a flaw in his own character that had cost him everything. Months later, the space that had once housed the Gilded Spoon remained empty. The "For Lease" sign had faded slightly in the sun. Through the dusty front windows, one could see the ghostly outlines on the floor where tables and chairs had once stood. The vibrant energy, the smells, the sounds, all had been replaced by a profound and echoing silence. The building itself had become an accidental monument, a local landmark known not for what it was, but for what had happened there. People would sometimes walk by and point it out, telling the story to a friend. "That's the place," they'd say. "That's where it happened." The incident had woven itself into the fabric of the neighborhood's memory. Kevin Thorne disappeared from the city's culinary scene. Rumor had it he moved back to his hometown to live with his parents, his ambition and finances shattered. The public apology drafted by Alana's lawyers was posted online and then forgotten, a final, sterile entry in a saga that had been defined by such raw, viral emotion. He became a cautionary tale whispered among other business owners, a ghost story about the high cost of prejudice in the digital age. Dr. Alana Sterling, on the other hand, never faltered. The incident, which could have been a source of trauma, instead became a footnote in a career defined by fighting for others. She continued her work at the civil rights firm, taking on new cases, writing legal briefs, and arguing before judges. She rarely spoke of the gilded spoon, not because it was painful, but because her focus was always on the next fight, the next person who needed a champion. The large donation made in her name allowed the local legal aid clinic to hire 2 new attorneys, ensuring that hundreds of people without the means to defend themselves would now have access to justice. In a way, Kevin Thorne's ugly act had inadvertently funded the very work that stood in opposition to everything his actions represented. The videos of the confrontation remained online, periodically resurfacing on social media. They were used in university sociology classes, in corporate diversity training seminars, and in law school ethics discussions. The image of Alana, sitting with such unshakable dignity while being confronted, became a sort of shorthand, a visual metaphor for grace under pressure in the face of baseless hostility. Her quiet, logical questions became a case study in how to de-escalate and expose bigotry without sacrificing one's composure. The moment had been hers, but the lesson had become everyone's. The story of the gilded spoon wasn't just about one man's failure. It was about a community's response, a digital world's verdict, and the quiet, unyielding power of a single individual who knew her rights and refused to be diminished. It was a story about consequences, both for the man who let his worst impulses win and for the woman who turned a moment of personal humiliation into a public victory for civil rights. The echoes of that Tuesday afternoon still lingered, not just in the empty room of the restaurant, but in the ongoing conversation about respect, dignity, and justice in everyday life. It's tempting to look at the story of Kevin Thorne and see a simple villain, but the reality is often more complex, rooted in a psychology that is both mundane and dangerous. What leads a person to make such a self-destructive choice? Perhaps it wasn't a sudden burst of malice, but a slow corrosion of character. It was the pressure of a failing business, the entitlement of ownership, and the insidious whisper of an unexamined bias. On that specific Tuesday, Kevin's personal anxieties found a target in Alana Sterling. He felt his world spinning out of control, and in a deeply flawed attempt to reclaim power, he chose to exert it over someone he subconsciously deemed other, someone he thought wouldn't or couldn't fight back. His actions weren't born from a grand, hateful ideology, but from the petty, fearful prejudice that lies dormant in so many, waiting for a moment of stress to give it life. Could this have all been avoided? Absolutely. If Kevin had taken a single deep breath before approaching her table, if he had recognized his stress and dealt with it instead of projecting it, the gilded spoon would likely still be serving its butternut squash soup today. For Alana, her path was one of immense grace. But what if she hadn't been a civil rights attorney? If she had yelled back, as many justifiably would, Kevin's video might have seemed more ambiguous to some, her character easier to assassinate. Her best protection was her own unassailable dignity and the immediate, silent support of strangers who chose to bear witness with their own cameras. It's a stark reminder that being an ally in the moment, simply recording the truth, can be an act of profound power. The ultimate lesson here is one of accountability. Our actions, especially those captured for the world to see, create ripples we can never fully anticipate. Kevin Thorne didn't just lose a restaurant, he lost the trust of his community because he failed a basic test of human decency. He chose suspicion over service, confrontation over kindness. Dr. Alana Sterling didn't seek revenge, she sought structural change, using the legal system to ensure that the consequence for his action was not just personal ruin, but a public good. It's a powerful narrative about how the smallest of interactions can expose the deepest of societal fractures, and how true strength is not in the volume of one's voice, but in the steadfastness of one's character. What do you think? Was the complete loss of his business a fair and just consequence for his actions? And what would you have done if you were another customer in that restaurant? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is a valuable part of this conversation.